What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our college basketball week 13 top 25. As always, I have Ty joining me breaking down this week's top 25. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Get us to 500 subscribers where we will be doing an autograph item giveaway. And all you have to do to be entered into that is to be subscribed to our channel. So go hit that button. But before we get into the rankings, we got to talk about the drop from the rankings. Kent State and New Mexico are the ones dropping. Some ugly losses for them. And Kent State had a very bad loss, so they aren't even getting receiving votes. But Ty, I'll turn it over to you here. Which team do you think could slide into the rankings next week?
I would look at Creighton and Illinois right now. Both of those teams are very talented. Creighton was a top 10 team, I think, to start the season. And they were at one point at like 7-6. So they have really hit their stride. The fact that they're even here shows they've been playing really well lately. And Illinois has been up and down, but they're starting to figure it out now.
Yeah, for me, I got to go San Diego State. They are ranked in the AP poll, but we just have them missing out. They are just very inconsistent right now, just like New Mexico out in the Mountain West. It's going to be one of those two teams to really bring home the championship in that conference, but there's just too much inconsistency from those teams just to put them in. Then Missouri, obviously, with a big win over Auburn last week, and that's why they are here in this category. But at 25, we do have those Auburn Tigers, and they're on a two-game losing streak after losing to Texas A&M as well. They're 2 games back in the SEC standings, and last week they were in the lead, well, 1 game back from Alabama, and now they're 2 games back, and they get to go to Tennessee on Saturday, which is, right now looking like a buzzsaw at this point in the season. So Auburn needs to turn it around very quickly if this team not just wants to be ranked this or next week, but to really have a chance in the SEC.
We got Charleston falling way down here to number 24. Ugly loss at home to Hofstra. It's hard to go undefeated in your conference, no matter what conference you're in. But when you lose a game like that to a team like that, you're going to drop pretty far. They are 21-2. So if they can win out in their conference, only have 2 losses going into the tournament, they should be, I want to say, like a 6 or 7 seed, somewhere around there, maybe on the 8-9 line. But either way, they're going to be a dangerous team. No one's going to want to play them in the first round because they can shoot the lights out on any given night. Obviously, they didn't this week, which is why they lost. But when they get hot, they're a tough team to beat. And you should expect them to pretty much coast through conference play. Maybe they'll lose one more game, but that's about it for them. The conference just isn't very strong, and they're a really good team.
23, the Yukon Huskies take a slight tumble as well, and this team needs to hit the panic button ASAP. They're 2-6 in their last 8 games. They still have a shot at the Big 12 title because those teams are going to beat each other up, or sorry, the Big East title once these teams, start playing each other and whatnot. Xavier and Providence and Marquette right now all are tied with 2 losses, so they're not too far behind. They're only 4 games back with a month and a few weeks left. So they do need to win out and get right. They have 2 easy games this week, or easy games should be for this Yukon Husky team. But this is the week to really turn it around and see what they're made of. Because if they lose one of these 2 games, then you can bet that this team is for sure dropping out of our rankings next week, just because neither of these teams have a winning record.
We got the Miami Hurricanes here at number 22. Tough loss at Pitt. But one thing about this team, unlike pretty much any other team in the country, they've been pretty consistent all year. Obviously, they've lost 5 games, but they haven't exactly lost to a terrible team. They haven't really beaten a really good team outside of Virginia. They've just been steady the whole year, and you haven't really seen that from anyone in college basketball this year outside of Purdue. So they at least have that going for them. I think they'll be about a 5 or 6 seed. And I look at them as a team who probably will get out of the first round. They probably won't get upset, but it's hard to see them really making a deep run, even to the Elite Eight like they did last year, just because they've been so steady. They're not really beating teams above them, and they're not really losing to teams below them too much. So they're a good team, not a great team, and I think that'll kind of continue for them going forward.
At 21, the Hoosiers of Indiana are making the jump back in to our rankings. And it's been a while. I think it's been a little over 6 weeks since this team has been in our rankings. That at one point in the beginning of January, they had a rough patch of 3 losses in a row. And since then, they have been on a 5 game winning streak with good wins in the Big Ten. But their biggest challenge is going to catch Purdue in the standings in the Big Ten. And they play them this weekend at home on Saturday, which should be a great game for both of these teams and a proving game for both of them as well. Trace Jackson Davis obviously has been great. Xavier Johnson has been great as well. But this Hoosier team, they need that signature win, and this would be the win to put on that resume.
And at number 20, we have Clemson, a team who isn't going to blow anyone out really, but they just continue to win. They're 10-1 in the ACC. A lot of people don't think they're going to close it out and win the ACC title, but if they can somehow get 2 wins this week and get to 12-1, eventually it's going to be just impossible to catch them if they continue to win. I know Virginia's right there, but if you can get to 12-1, everyone's just kind of at your heels. And, no one seems to be talking about Clemson. If they just continue to keep winning, I think they could end up a top 4 seed in March. And this team plays really good defense, which means even on an off night, they still have a chance to beat whoever they're playing. So this week they should win at Boston College. They've been pretty brutal this year. But that game Saturday against Miami will be a big one. I think that could really determine whether Virginia has a chance to catch Clemson or if they're just going to run away with the ACC.
At 19, we also have the St. Mary Gales joining our rankings, and this is much overdue. We were kind of halting on it just a little bit, but they did get a big win over BYU on the road last weekend. And how do they get rewarded? Well, they get 2 home games against some solid teams in the West Coast Conference. And then obviously you can see that number 12 ranked Gonzaga coming to their place, which is the biggest, series in the West Coast Conference every year, just because these two teams are at the top of it. And they're on a 10-game winning streak, possibly 11 going into that game. And this team is hot. I just don't think they're still getting enough credit. Obviously, they're on the West Coast, so they're 3 hours behind on the Eastern side and whatnot. And they're not getting talked about, not enough love. And that's what makes this team so dangerous coming into March, because not too many know about this team.
We got the Providence Friars here at number 18. Once again, a year where expectations were, they weren't expected to be a bad team, but definitely not expected to be a middle of the pack ranked team like they are again this year. Obviously, last year they ended up winning the Big East for, I believe, the first time ever. And this year they're right there in the hunt at 9-2. They have a very good chance to at least get a share of the conference title, especially if they can win this week at number 17, Xavier. That would have been a really tough game a couple weeks ago. It's still going to be tough, but Xavier has had some bad losses, so that's a winnable game for the Friars. And this team is just a really tough team. They shoot a ton of free throws because they're very aggressive on offense. They get to the rim. And teams like that are tough in the tournament because typically in the tournament they call a lot more fouls. So I think Providence is going to be a lot more dangerous than people think, and they have a very good shot to at least get a share of that Big East title.
17, we have the Xavier Musketeers dropping after a very ugly loss on the road to Creighton by 17. And you got to give Creighton credit, though. This team was injured earlier in the year, struggled since probably before the new year. Since the new year, they've turned things around and really have hit their stride. So I think in the long run, it won't be as bad of a loss as it is now for Xavier. But this team, is 9-2 in conference play, and they get a tough matchup with Providence, who is, tied in first place in the Big East. So that will mean a lot on Tuesday, and whoever wins that game will be in sole possession of first. But this Musketeers team has really turned some heads this year. We had them as high as 8 in our rankings, and whoever wins this Big East, I think, will be probably a top 3 seed come March if these teams can stay around the same records.
At 16, we have Florida Atlantic, and this team just continues to win. They're 11-0 in their conference. The Conference USA, obviously not super strong, but it's definitely towards the top of the mid-major conferences, and they haven't really had a close game in conference. They've pretty much won every game by double digits, even on the road. So it's not like they're just, kind of inching past some of these teams like we've seen with Gonzaga over in the West Coast Conference. They're just going in and dominating pretty much every game in conference play. They have that only loss at Ole Miss, who's not a great team, but it's not a bad loss, especially on the road. So I think this team is definitely deserving of where they are, and they're going to be a dangerous team because they're a lot better than people think.
15, Marquette is flying up the rankings with good wins last week. They just keep on winning. Villanova and Butler this week should be easier side of the conference that they could face. And, obviously they are also tied with Xavier and Providence for the Big East lead. So when these teams face off here later this month, you're going to really see who is going to put themselves in the driver's seat, at least for the Big East tournament, and go from there. But the Golden Eagles have looked really well this year. No complaints really from me. Nothing really too like ugly of games. They've been in, I think, every game that they've lost, and it's really came down to the last few minutes. So Marquette is a team that I would kind of be, picking to go to the Sweet 16, maybe Elite Eight run come March, just because that this team, it just seems like they have something going for them, and they're getting the wins and gutting out great performances and doing it the right way and not just chucking up a bunch of threes and shooting pretty good. So they're doing everything right. This team is very fundamental, and they're one of my dark horse picks to make a run in March.
At 14, we have the Iowa State Cyclones. Another team in the Big 12. You're going to see a lot more of those coming up. This is the best conference in the country. I don't think there's any argument. And they're holding their own. 6-2 this year. Remember last year, I think they started like 15-0, kind of fell down the stretch to an 11 seed. I don't really see that happening this year. They're just a really good team. This week, they go to Texas Tech, which is going to be tough, but they get Kansas at home after they feel like they definitely should have won at Kansas. So they'll have that game circled for sure. And if they can get that win, then they will keep pace there for that Big 12 title. They are right there on the doorstep in that conference. And like about six, maybe seven other Big 12 teams, they're going to be really dangerous in March because they play really good defense.
At 13, yet another Big 12 team with TCU. And this team only drops one after a tough loss on the road in overtime to Mississippi State, which is a decent team this year. And they get to rebound this week with what should be an easy, not easy two wins, but favorable matchups in the Big 12. Probably get to 18-5, 7-3 in the conference. But Mike Miles has been just everything for this team, doing it all and really putting the team on his back in at least all the games I have watched, which has been quite a lot, quite a bit. So these Horned Frogs, maybe they can have a magical run like they did in the college football playoff come March.
At number 12, we have Gonzaga, a team who's kind of scraped their way through a lot of games in conference play. Not quite what we've seen from the past Gonzaga teams where they just run through the West Coast Conference. They have that ugly loss to Loyola Marymount at home. This week, they go to St. Mary's, and they're about the only team that's had anything close to consistent success against Gonzaga. Obviously, no one else has really competed with them in the conference, but that's a place Gonzaga has struggled as of late, and I would not be surprised at all if St. Mary's beats them again this year at home. And if that happens, this will be the first time in a while that Gonzaga doesn't win the conference because if they lose, I don't see them catching St. Mary's from down two games in that conference. So it's definitely a down year for the Bulldogs, but of course, they're still a really good team. They'll still be a 3 or 4 seed, and they'll still have a chance to make a really deep run in March. But yeah, it's not your Timmy Holmgren Gonzaga team that we saw last year.
11, UCLA is dropping out of the top 10. And this one is concerning for me. I think, two losses in a row is unlike this team. After being 17-2 and now you're 17-4, so you got to fall out of the top 10. But it wasn't a close loss. They lost on the road by 13 to their rival, USC. And I just don't think that game really went their way. It got out of hand late. But they need to rebound this week. They need to get 2 wins to really solidify themselves as a top team. But even if they lose one, I'm still concerned about this team moving forward because you don't want to fall into this trap right before March Madness starts and go into the tournament cold. So UCLA, I know it's not a panic situation yet, but I think if you're going to lose another game this week, it might be just because, we've seen it happen in the past. Teams go in to the tournament cold and not just get upset, but get blown out in an upset.
And we got Kansas staying put here at number 10. 1-1 week. They end their 3-game losing streak with a huge win at Rupp Arena, a game they were underdogs in. And they're in the Big 12, so it gets no easier this week. They get the rematch with Kansas State, and then they have to go to Iowa State. So, a lot of teams would be very happy with winning one of those games, but Kansas has lost three of their last four. So, and being 5-3 in the Big 12, it's kind of do or die now for Kansas if they're going to win the Big 12 title. And this is a team that wins that conference just about every year. So, it'd be a big disappointment if they can't get it done this year. I think Jalen Wilson's probably the second best player in the country. So, even if it's an off night for Kansas, they can still look to him to kind of will them to a win. I think that's really going to help them come March. But this team's got to right the ship a little bit because they've been struggling a little bit lately.
At 9, you have Texas staying put as well. And this team, just kind of got, not destroyed, but it just didn't seem like they were in the game really at all. Tennessee kind of took care of them, but Tennessee right now is just on fire and doing everything right in that program. And Texas, well, you see it right there. They're going to be the next two teams we talk about. They face 8 at home tomorrow and 7 on the road on Saturday. So a huge week for them, not just resume, but Big 12 standings implications and whatnot this week. So if they want to, take hold of the Big 12, they got to get these two wins. And if they do, well, these two wins will vault them for sure into our top 5 next week. And you got to think what they have been through this year with just the whole Chris Beard situation, Marcus Carr finally breaking out, having a great year. Texas, it just seems like the puzzle pieces are aligning for something magical come March.
And we got the Baylor Bears with a big jump this week to number 8. And I think Baylor is back. I think it's safe to say that they have arrived once again. Remember, they started 0-3 in the Big 12. A lot of people were kind of panicking, but they are right back where everyone expected them to be. Got a big win over Kansas this week. Now they go to number 9, Texas. I think tomorrow. A big week for them. They can get to 7-3. And this team has a chance to accomplish everything they wanted to, which is win the Big 12, make a deep run in March. That's still all on the table. And they can shoot the lights out, as we've seen the last few games, especially the Kansas game, where they just came out on fire. And they're going to be really dangerous. I think they were kind of struggling to find themselves early in the year, a lot of new pieces, but now they look like maybe the best team in the Big 12. And if not, they're right up there.
So I guess these two teams are actually playing in an hour. So instead of tonight, by the time you see this video, the game will at least be started or be over. So we'll jump to number 7, and you got Kansas State, and they have tough test this week after a loss last week to Iowa State. Well, you pretty much got to put it this way: the toughest game this year for them is at Kansas, just because rivalry game. Kansas. I don't know the exact stat, but I'm assuming Kansas has just manhandled them over and over again through the last 10 years. I would love to see that stat line. So this is probably the best team they've had. Keontae Johnson is having a great year after all he's been through the last 3 years, the Florida incident and what he's had to do and his steps to recovery. And so that's great to see for this K-State team. And then Marquise Noel, he's been great too. And it's a great 1-2 punch for these team. But then you got to go play Texas at home. And I think if you're K-State, you got to be happy with a 1-1 week at worst. Obviously, you're going to shoot to win both these games, but you got to look back maybe in a few weeks and be like, man, that was probably the toughest week we're going to have all year. Go 1-1. I'm okay with it because, once you come to March, none of those other games matter. It's all building that resume. And if they want to take hold of this Big 12, well, then prove it to me this week and win both of these games and be leading the conference.
At number 6, Alabama takes a drop. Still 8-0 in the in the SEC. So if you're gonna lose a game, I guess this would be the one playing out of conference. But they got manhandled by average at best Oklahoma team. I know it's a road game, but that place never fills up at Oklahoma. It's not a extremely tough place to play, and they just got absolutely blown out. So maybe that's just a burn the tape type of game for Alabama and they'll get right back on track. We'll find out this week. They go to LSU, which is usually a tough place to play. but Alabama beat them by 40 in Tuscaloosa. So I think it's going to be a 2-0 week, and I think they'll be 10-0 in the SEC. So assuming they come out just fine against Vanderbilt, I don't think there's anything to worry about. That might have just been, their worst game of the year, an off night, and I think everything will be fine. Last week I said they were the best team in the country. I don't think that anymore, but they're still very good, obviously.
And starting our top five, we have Virginia jumping back in for the first time since they were ranked number one in our polls. And this is going to be a tough week for them. I think going on the road to face Syracuse is always a tough game. It seems like these two teams have always had not bad blood, but very competitive spirit. And then at Virginia Tech, obviously, rivalry game, which is going to be tough. But they are a game and a half back from Clemson. They're on a 6-game winning streak. Seems like everything is trending their way to become one of the dominant teams yet again in college basketball. And that's thanks to Armaan Franklin. He's having a career year for these Cavaliers. But the one thing that concerns me is if they face, let's say, a Purdue or a great rebounding team come March, this team is going to get bodied in the paint. 359th in the nation. And if you were wondering, there are 363 Division I college basketball teams. So there's only three teams that they are better than in the country. That's very concerning for me, and I'm sure not a lot of people know about that right now. And if you're, keeping track of these things for your bracket or whatnot, I would definitely look at rebounding for the other team because this team does not rebound the ball well.
At number 4, we have Arizona. This is a team that looked like they were going in the complete wrong direction a couple weeks ago. Remember, they had that really bad loss at home to Washington State. But since then, they've looked like a top 5 team once again. They have that big win over UCLA. This week, they go 2-0 again. And now, this coming week, they play the 2 Oregon schools at home. So you'd expect them to win both of those games. I know they got blown out by Oregon the last time they played. I would expect them to go 2-0 this week, get to 10-3 in the conference, and they should be potentially a top 3 team going forward. And they're a couple really bad games away from maybe even being number 1 right now. But that's the only thing that would concern me if I'm an Arizona fan. The fact that they've just completely laid an egg in a couple games this year. But outside of that, they look very good, and they'll have a shot to make a Final Four this year for the first time in a while.
At 3, Houston is moving back up, and this is because they rallied over Cincinnati at home, down 13 in the second half, which was very concerning, but they came back and won this game, and that just shows that Houston is legit. Yes, the week before they lost, and we've had to move them down, but this team has showed resiliency. Jarace Walker dropped 25 in that game, and it just proves to me that this Houston team might be the best one they've had in the last, 3 years after making the run in the Final Four, Elite Eight, and whatnot. Maybe this is the year that they go to the national championship game. And I'm not saying they will, but it seems like, just like a few other teams I've mentioned, the puzzle pieces are aligning for this Houston team to really put it all together come March.
At number 2, we have Tennessee. And this feels like a team no one had really talked about until Saturday, when, of course, game day came to Knoxville and Tennessee took down Texas at home. And like you said, they didn't dominate, so to speak. They won by 11. It never really felt like they let that game slip at all. It felt like they were in firm control the whole time. So that was a really impressive win against a good team. This week they go to Florida, which could be tough, and then they get Auburn at home. If they can win both of those games, they should remain in the top 2. And even if they lose one, they might still stay in the top 5 the way they've been playing. They've just been very steady all year. They don't really have a bad loss. And, they have a couple really good wins, including Kansas on a neutral site. So I think they're going to be a really dangerous team. And they have a good shot to win the SEC if they can get some help with an Alabama loss. But yeah, I think they have a very good shot to end up as a 1 seed in the tournament.
And at 1, we have Purdue staying put, and this team is the most deserving. This is their 5th time here at number 1 in our rankings. And this team really proved it to me when they just, beat Michigan State. And, the game looked a little closer than it was. But when Edey was in that game, obviously he set his career high of 38 points. But when he is in that game, no one could stop him. He just dominated both ends of the floor. That's when Michigan State made their runs when he was out of the game. and put him back in, and immediately it was a 15-point lead yet again. So if that's the case, Purdue really needs Edey to stay out of foul trouble and obviously not get injured. That's easy to say, but this team seems like it's on a crash course to block up a 1 seed very shortly. I think if they get that road win at Indiana this week, stay atop our rankings and whatnot, and get a ranked win in conference against your rival, it just seems like Purdue can do almost anything at this point to not be at least a top 3 seed at this point. It's not for sure being a 1 seed yet, but they are at least the top 3 seed no matter what happens here going forward. But I do like the solid play of Fletcher Loyer. He has been a great freshman addition to this Purdue team, which needed some guard scoring, and he is doing that, being a good complement guard to Edey, getting it into the paint and spot up shooter and whatnot. But the only concern I do have about this Purdue team is what happened when they played Michigan on the road. I know obviously we're Michigan fans and whatnot, but it seemed like they struggled a little bit. And I think if Michigan had Jett Howard, that game could have flipped, and maybe Michigan walks away with a win, because we know what Jett Howard can do and how he has been a huge impact on Michigan. But, we got to give Purdue credit. A win is a win on the road. And it seems like these two teams, Michigan and Purdue at least, always split in the season series. So maybe this is the year where Purdue ends that. But, they do deserve this #1 ranking. And that's going to be it for our rankings this week. Make sure you guys come back next week to check out our rankings, see if Purdue is still on top, and see if your team is still in the rankings or enters the rankings. But as always, the Bench Buddies are out.
She never called back.